Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Where does this idea come from? The concept, it's a surname that all the people have now. It's not just a marriage thing. It's um, it's seen as being the union between a man and woman, signified by the rings, probably like over here, Mr. and Mrs. And some beautiful picture here. But if you look at the letters and the iconography here, it actually is Mr. and Misters, Mr. and Misters, and it was changed over time to be Mrs. And there's a strange thing to go with that. That seems to be a Roman and Roman Catholic kind of thing that was embraced. There's Mr. and Mrs. Well, what is the difference between Misters and Mrs.? Well, Misters is an odd thing. Before marriage, Misters is a mistress, okay? And so it is someone's woman or love, but there's not a sacred bond of the marriage that we have today. Men back in the day had, if you could afford it, you could just have multiple wives and concubines. You'd have a main wife and you'd have concubines and things like that. Well, that was what kings did. And then people started mimicking this same idea of this Mr. and Misters is the idea that the woman, through the bond of a ring that they used to put in their nose, seen in the Bible, believe it or not, in Rachel, whenever they go to find Rachel and Leah, and or is it? Yeah, it's when Isaac doesn't want a Canaanite woman and sends it back to their fathers. The first thing he does when he meets her at a well and she offers the waters, he throws a ring in her nose, and then they go inside. If you'll read the ancient Hebrew, it's still got it in there, and some Bibles still do today. So he threw a ring in her nose like a little bull, and that's the way they had bulls. And why did bulls always have this? Well, that's because of Asherah and the story of the Queen of Heaven and how she's a bull from way back when Taurus was around and Taurus worship. And it comes all the way through time, believe it or not. But Mr. and Misters was whenever a woman was a man's property. And whenever they got betrothed to her or whatever, it was basically sold to him. And so, and there was your dowry. And so the woman got sold. Now, this is an ancient pagan belief or pagan system, but it's something that we're still kind of under today. You understand the idea of the dowry and the ring, and the father is the one that pays for the wedding and things like that. So it still comes down from that tradition that's there from old times. So this Mr. and Misters and Misters is an ownership type of thing. Now, I'm not saying that guys own their wives or anything like that. We are way past this in society, and we're way past with the people that created this. But where does Mr. come from in the first place? Mr. Misters. Well, Mr., oddly enough, goes back to gods and goddesses and stuff, and Greek and Rome and all the goddesses you hear about, and gods in the Bible even. Let's see, stir as a god, and you'll find that stir as a god was looked at as being this creature here, which is like the devil, and he's also old father time that you see in these depictions like this. So who was stir? Well, there's another way of spelling stir, would be with a U, and I think that's going to bring us up a bunch of food items. So let's see here. Stir God. We're going to get that. Yeah, so you see things that'll show up like this, like the god Stir is actually Ninurta, and that the god Stir is where the word satyr comes from. The ancient Hebrews didn't put in the vowels, and so you end up with str or stur or styr. See, and then the new language we made, there's that sometimes y that gets thrown in there, isn't it? And so you get, out of stir, you get satyr. He's a pagan god with legs and horns and pointy ears of a goat, right? Satyrs. My daughter made an outfit of one. And basically all it really is you take an animal skin and make pants out of it and then put on your little goat horn top mask. And that's what these people did for a time back then. It was a real paganistic thing, or looked at as being primordial. You know, the Vikings had, horns on their helmet and all this type of stuff. But then people that are against these people can later turn this into Satan, boy, real quick. And so here's an Inerta right here in the Babylonian thing. I think it's showing up fairly well in there. But so there's Stir the god, right? So, let's just go to Google all. Let's just go to that and let's see what people say about satyr. Wikipedia. I guess we could look at that. Hebrew, Semitic commandments. Let's look at Hebrew neglected commandments. This will tell you something about it. It's like wiki books. And so this tells you about Saturnalia. And they say that it, supposedly someone told him it meant sun stop. But Saturnalia would be the worship of Saturn. And stir is Saturn. In Chaldean, it's known as just S-T-U-R, stir. So who is stir? Well, later it's turned into stern and Shatan in the Bible, which is Satan. And that's this same creature here that's done. That's odd. And so there's stir. And so you are basically saying, my stir. Whenever you're calling out yourself, you're calling yourself under this God, that he is my stir. Okay? And the women now, because of the Roman takeover of the world and the religions of the world, believe it or not, maybe if you watch some of my other things, you'll start to realize it. But they had the Zeus as one of their major gods, right? He was the god of thunder and storms, and during a world coming into drought, that really turned into somebody they know how to worship, they thought. Well, Zeus is actually Z, and they put us on the end of Mithras, us, is, and all these things on the end of Roman names, but it's really the regular name, and his name was Z, and what Z is, if you just look at a Z, it's a lightning bolt. It's the original ideogram of a lightning bolt, and it was the symbol of him and the symbol of Baal. So Zeus is actually Zeus, and correctly, I guess, said, but whenever you say Mrs., you're actually saying my Zeus as a woman. So Zeus married the religion of Saturn, and formed a religion out of what was Hebrew and turned into Christianity because it grabbed more of their myths. Let's look into that real quick. Let's see. All the known sun deities were born on December 25th. These include Mithra, Krishna, Vishnu, Osiris, Horus, Hercules, Dionysus, who is Bacchus, Tammuz, Endamuzi, Indira, Jesus Christ, Buddha, as well as the Scandinavian goddesses. And there's Aryan sun myths. All these are Aryan sun myths. All these people that started all this were Aryans. You can see pictures of Buddha with blue eyes, and all of the Egyptian gods and original pharaohs had blue eyes. So these are all Aryans, and if you want to look up my video on Aryans, it shows you that there's a connection that they've made even through the DNA now, and 92% match on King Tut and Akhenaten to current white, blue-eyed Europeans. So, we've always wondered where they went. And the odd thing is that they turned into the Greeks and Romans that built the giant temples there out of stone also. But I digress, and that's not the point of this. Let's get into the figure out what Mr. and Mrs. is, and where does Stern come from. So behind all pagan deity worship is Satan himself. He accepts honor in whatever name you call him: Baal, Moloch, Marduk, Venus, Odin, Krishna, Aphrodite, Ishtar, Zeus, Amun, Ra, Mithras. Any of these gods that you would say that's not the God of the Bible is got to be pagan. And so is Saturn, right? Well, the odd thing, people, and I'm just going to go ahead and bust into it now because we're getting deep into the video already. The ancient Phoenician word for the wandering star that everybody knows today as Saturn was Israel. And so whenever they name him Israel in the Bible, they fall on from there, that's Israel. Well, also, their symbol is the star. Well, that's the seal of Solomon. He worshipped Saturn, and as one of the deities that he worshipped, along with a group, if you'll remember the Bible story, he supposedly went to God for a while, but then built all these other temples. And God had made him the wisest person in the world, and like a genie's wish. And yet his wisest thought was to make sure all these people got worshipped and not just that one that was jealous. I digress again, people. I'm sorry. But the name Nimrod in Hebrew may be derived from Marad, meaning he rebelled. And I tell you that it does, probably because they say that he rebelled against God, that Nimrod was a great warrior in the face of the Lord. And he's the constellation of Orion. And of course, Orion comes from Aryan, and Aryan comes from Sumerian, and the Aryan people that are there. In fact, the Amari people, or Sumerian, Amari, all that. When you get that, and even Mary, even the name Mary, that actually means ocean and waters, come from these original people. But I digress again. I'm sorry. So it meant he rebelled, but then Nimur actually is a name of a leopard. And the ancient story is that a leopard was half-breed between a black panther and a lion, that he had taken both traits, and therefore he was a vicious beast. And of course, this is starting with people starting to stick goats on the heads of lions and all kinds of crazy stuff to make up this story and what pictures look like. But, they're just people thinking of what hybrids were back then. So Nimrod was known as the god of the Chaldean mysteries. Now, what's weird about that? Let's get this word here. We're missing something. Mystery. Mister is the basis of the word mystery. Saturn. Babylonian dictator Nimrod was deified as Saturn. Satan and Saturn are the same words. One early Latin, which actually is like Persian, and the other late Latin, like modern, is Satan. And of course, the Hebrews had an H on their Satan, so it was Shatan. And the Persian word were identical. So then you can look at some of my other videos and see this exact same thing. So now we figured out who Satan really was. And apparently he died a whole long time ago, but he still had a grip on the earth. Or how's this go? Well, he's the God of this earth, as you believe in the Bible and everything. Well, you come to find out that this is what the Hebrews were worshiping, people. That Israel, again, is Saturn. And so Saturn and the mystery are both Chaldean words. They are correlative terms. The mystery signifies the hidden system, so Saturn signifies hidden God. You see that? Okay. So Saturn in Chaldee, which is Ur, where Abraham came from. And those people were real smart. The Sumerians are the beginning of time of everyone. They created time itself. They created every known modern thing that we have today. You almost can give to them. I mean, agriculture, the wheel, everything comes to Sumerians. You want to see my thing on Sumerians? You just look up Sumerian, inventions, and they'll only give you about 20 of them, but there's really more than that. And then what you can imagine is what came out of that. Anyhow, Chaldee of Ur, pronounced Satur, from the Ur, because they're in Ur, and so that's where they get Saturna from. And in Rome, it's called Saturnus. They put Saturnus on it. Oh, and an interesting fact, Rome worshipped this so badly. If you look it up, the ancient name for Rome was Saturnus Mons. And so the mountain of Rome, the main one, which is known as Capitol Hill now, was their main place that they lived, and they actually called it Saturnus Mons, for they worship Saturn. So you can imagine that there's a whole lot of pull for them to twist. And now you've always wondered why Rome and its taking over of everybody would end up adopting this religion of these pagan tent people that ran around in the desert looking for a god. And it's because whenever they found into it, they realized that they were worshiping the same gods, Saturn. So anyhow, I digress too many times. It consists of only 4 letters in Chaldee, which is STUR. This name contains exactly the apocalyptic number, so if you use the numbers, 4 letters, 60, 40, 6, and 200, that comes to 666, and that is Nimrod's number. And if you look at my Nimrod thing, it'll show you a deal about it. But Satyr is the goat-legged half-man. He's just wearing goat-made pants. People in old times, now he's a barbarian. Well, who's calling him barbarian? Tent dweller? Exactly. Well, he was a hunter, a mighty hunter, and so he wore animal skins to get rid of his sin so he could sneak up on animals and do things like that and wear fake animal skins. They would put them on their backs and lean over and walk along like they're a deer and get closer and stand up and shoot things and stuff like that so they'd get an advantage, which of course they were saying, well, that's against God. That I guess the animal's just supposed to fall over. But of course, people back then were only eating off of the land, and these nomadic tent people were definitely doing so. And but they learned to eat meat real quick and start killing bulls and goats and stuff real quick in the Bible. But anyhow, Satyros, Oxford Dictionary emphasizes Satyros in the Greek. The Satyrs are the leader is Pan in the old Greek mythology, known as goat gods. Early Babylonians called the sun the goat and said that the goat god was sun god. Isaiah 13:21 identifies the Satyrs as belonging to Babylon. The scapegoat Azazel of Leviticus, where they used to take one goat and sacrifice it to God Yahweh, they say in the Bible, but the name's been changed. And the other two, Azazel. Azazel is who? Well, he's the devil. It was a figure of Satan, Christianity and mythology. J.M. Robertson tells you on these pages. It's also confirmed by the church father Origen. If you look up Origen, he'll tell you that Azazel was the scapegoat. That what they would do is they'd put all the sins of the people onto a goat and have a kid run it off into the wilderness, off a cliff to its death, and that was supposedly to appease Satan, who was running loose on the world. And so that is worship, because you're giving to that God, people. And then the other one that they killed the goat to was this guy, because you can see the goat references we started with. And that is Saturn, whose name is Israel. Keep that in mind, that whenever it says Israel in the Bible, it's probably talking about these. Also, a weird correlation is that Abraham's original ideogram, the pictogram pictures they used to use, is identical to the little hourglass of time. It was kind of on its side, but it's an hourglass, and it's the symbol for time. Kind of an eternity symbol if you think of it on its side. Infinity symbol. And so they're trying to create Abraham with that, but the other people that they killed off were telling him that they were stealing the shit from ancient antiquity that wasn't theirs because you're nomadic tent people, and they got killed for it. Anyhow, the Saturnalia, therefore, Saturnalia was named for Saturn, otherwise known as Cronus. Cronus is an alias for Tammuz. Tammuz was Nimrod's reborn alias, his son. His wife was pregnant, and with him, whenever he got killed in his 40th year, the reason they use 40 in the Bible so much, and in his 40th year he got killed, but she was already pregnant with his son, and instead of the kingdom going to someone else, they took upon her to be the queen of heaven that took everything a step farther until the child could grow up and then take over again. And he was the very first junior there ever was. And then they say that he grew up and married his own mom. Well, that's because his name was the same as the one that married her, but it wasn't. It was Nimrod. So they went with a Nimrod thing. And this was the story that was passed down, but we can find now that the kid's name was Tammuz, and it actually was Demuzi. And so she renamed him that name. But, well, anyhow, Ezekiel shows some of the abominations taking place in the temple, incorporating the worship of Tammuz and the religious services in Ezekiel 8:5, right? By the way, Ezekiel, the god El is the god of the Canaanite pantheon, and El is Saturn. So all these names with El, and the fact that there's angels, and there's names like Nathaniel and Michael and Azazel in the first place, and that the Elohim is the God's counsel, shows you that this is what they were worshiping through all of this. And in fact, Elohim is still the name accepted today. People, I'm showing you the straight up thing. Satan, Hebrew, Shatan. See, I told you, Shatan means adversary, of course, and who's ever against them. Whoever's against the tent people would be called Satan. Even if they were from God themselves, these people would call it Satan. He is a real fallen messenger opposed to Yahweh. He's ruling the entire earth in all religions, political and mercantile areas, and the truest Yahweh's account for Yahweh's counterfeit practices and worships of our methods of worship. True worship is in spirit. And so this guy's going to start quoting Bible verses and everything. Must be according to the word, all this thing. Anyhow, under Christmas we find the Roman world. Saturnalia was a time of merrymaking and exchanging gifts. December 25th was also regarded as the birthday of the Iranian mystery god Mithra. Look up my one on Mithra, and it will show you how that is where they get Jesus Christ from. He is the son of righteousness. He is the sun god, also known as Saturnalia, as well as Nimrod. That's not true. They're trying to equate these things, but that's not true. Well, Nimrod turned into the sun, so I guess if you said that, then yeah, okay. Now I see how they get that. Okay, so Nimrod turned into the sun and cast rays, and the rays is what got her pregnant with the kid. Now, that's what other people said about it, but that's just because they're idiots. I'm led to believe at this time they didn't know that there was about 9 months worth of pregnancy. And only until a woman really showed up did they know. They only thought that you only had about 3 or 4 months of pregnancy, maybe 6 at the most, but it sure as hell wasn't 9. And therefore, ta-da, they thought that she was like magically pregnant, and that it had come across, and whenever she named him his own son, and that by effect gave her an heir that was a son that was an offspring of him. So there's your king again, but they have to raise him up as a youngster. This is the beginnings of the story of King Arthur too, by the way. Anyhow, Mithra, according to ancient legend, pre-birth of Yahweh Messiah. This is, Mithra goes back to about 1600 BC, and I would like to believe by its Taurus iconography, that if you look at the Mithra thing that I have, will show you, and how it connects to Taurus, that is at the age of Taurus. He's killing Taurus the bull, coming into Aries, so this would have put it at 2100 BC, although it gets real popular all over the world and takes over in about 300 BC. Mithra was December 25th, born of a virgin. His birth was witnessed by shepherds and magicians, magi. Mithra raised the dead and healed the sick and cast out demons. He returned to heaven in the spring equinox, northern hemisphere, and before doing so had a last supper with his 12 disciples, representing the 12 signs of the zodiac, eating midst, a piece of bread marked with a cross, and almost universally the symbol of the sun, that's hot crossed buns that everybody used to eat back then, and still do to this day. It was meant to be a symbol of eating of his flesh, going all the way back to this old idea that even Jesus Christ said that you will eat of my flesh, and you will. So he's telling you where he comes from versus the Jews and what they are saying, and he tells them they're a liar. And the devil and the father of the lies. Such is the counterfeit Christ, who would assume to be like the Most High God, and upon her forehead name was written Mystery, Meister, Babylon the Great. Remember, the whore of Babylon is actually, and the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth is actually the queen of heaven that lived in the land of milk and honey that Abraham lived in before he came to the Canaanites and started a new religion, or adopted one that was there. And it tells you in Joshua 24 too that Abraham's descendants before him lived across the river and worshipped other gods. And people just go, oh, yeah, they were idol worshippers. Yeah, well, Noah just died 6 years ago. And in the time of Noah, people didn't remember God. And a weird, striking thing you'd have to add to that is the fact that that also means that the begot, all the way back to Adam and Eve, would have been worshiping other gods too. And so Adam and Eve wouldn't have been ever talking to this God here that claims to be a God later. You're getting what we're saying here, right? That later he says he's the God of everything. Well, in the Bible it says who's the one that tries to claim that he's everything? Well, he's Satan. Well, in the Hebrew Bible it says that the guy that created everything is Satan. Well, that just means adversary, but the concept of Satan comes back on somebody, and these people are Saturn worshippers. So, I mean, there's so much more to this. Celebration in Rome on December 25th, pagan festival inaugurated in 274 is the birthday of the unconquered sun in 274. You know, the Bible, they're going, oh, well, that's after Christ. See, yeah, well, if you look it up, Christ didn't really come into about 300, and what it was them just taking and going, wham, you know what? We're going to take that Christ thing and turn it into this. 274, Council of Nicaea comes up during the person's lifetime that's there. Unconquered sun, which at the winter solstice begins again to show an increase in light. So what happens is the sun goes all the way down, and it gets lower and lower in the sky. You can look this up in my other video, but it gets lower and lower and lower in the sky during winter, and it stops for 3 days and starts to rise up again. And it's sitting on a constellation called the Southern Cross right there. And so the Son of God goes and gets stuck on the cross for 3 days and dies, and then 3 days later is resurrected. And this is the whole story that's from there and everything. Funk and Wagnall's Standard Dictionary of Folklore, Mythology, and Legend, which I owned 2 different copies of. The usual was suspended during Saturnalia. No punishments were handed down by court. Schools were closed. It was a time of feasting. Release. War ceased. The toga replaced by an undergarment because it got colder. Masquerading in change of dress between the sexes occurred, where people would dress up and stuff. Gambling, especially dicing, was countenanced. In other words, they allowed people to do gambling and dice games and stuff like that. There was weird instances of during that time. There would be times during this, not the whole festival, that masters serving their servants. They would come in and feed them, which Jesus pulls off in his thing where he washes the servants' feet. Speech and action, as in many fertility ceremonies they had going on. Sex was kind of rampant and allowed to go on, because if they had sex right now and they had children from it, that they would be born coming into the next harvest. That was the time, and that would be a great time of it. By the way, the people before this were trying to have children around on Easter, and that's so during this time they could have children, that if they had to eat them to make it through winter, they would do so. And the cannibalism, which is still shown in here. One moment. Let's see. The whole series of observances placed Saturnalia among fertility rites. Everything tended towards increasing or fruitfulness in nature of people, and rotation of the seasons by observing the turn of the sun northward again and coming back up. The gift of imitation of fruit, apparently to do with the increase of life. The candles indicate the making of a new fire, back to fire gods of Samaria. Customary at the solstices, the dolls that are given as gifts have been noted as an early varo, are the remnants of the custom of human and child sacrifice. Each Roman community selected victim, which they forced to indulge in food and other physical pleasures throughout the week. At the festival's conclusion, December 25th, the Roman authorities believed they were destroying the forces of darkness by brutally murdering this innocent man or woman that they would chase through the streets and beat to death. And he was the scapegoat. You see what I'm saying here? And that's not part of Christmas today, is it? Ancient Greek writer, poet, historian Lucian, in his dialogue entitled Saturnalia, describes the festival's observance in his time. In addition to human sacrifice, he mentions these customs: widespread intoxication, going from house to house while singing naked. That's a precursor of modern caroling. Having a lot of sex, incense, and consuming human-shaped biscuits. And we still see that today as gingerbread men, don't we, people? This all ties it together. It hasn't been long. We've been under a fog for 2,000 years, and it's about time for this shit to end. knowledge is coming out, and knowledge finally trumps superstition. They celebrated what they thought was the sun's return by having orgies, human and animal sacrifices, and eating blood by blood pudding, which we today call Christmas pudding, as a symbol of that, even though it may not be blood pudding. A lot of times it's bread pudding or one of those things. Or, oh man, I like me some banana pudding, man, with some Nilla wafers in it. The festival has characterized by gift-giving, feasting, singing, and debauchery. The priests of Saturn carried wreaths of evergreen boughs in procession throughout the Roman temples. They decorated their homes with green branches, evergreen wreaths, incense, and candles, going all the way back to the evergreen tree worship of the Sumerians. If you'll look up my deal on Christmas and its beginnings, they give gifts to one another. Everywhere people stopped work to join in the celebration. Roman Empire was a world-ruling empire at this time. The customs of Rome were spread throughout the entire world. Britons and Celts, Indians, Egyptians were all called part of the Roman Empire at the time, and all the people in between there. And guess where that means? So, save only a few gathered in their homes to drink wine, dance and sing, light their candles, and exchange presents. They wouldn't do some of the crazy shit Romans did, but they did a lot of the other parts of it, and that turned into the symbolism we have for Christmas, giving their little children little clay dolls that represented their former sacrifices they used to give. The Strinae, honoring the goddess Strinia, were given for good luck, and again, here we have Stir and Strin. The Feast of Fools and the Lord of Misrule derive directly from Saturnalia. The Christmas tree holy, the mistletoe, the lights, the gold and silver decorations, even the color theme of red and green, which they say is for the sun, and I'm telling you it's for the blood of sacrifice, had their origin in festivities associated with sun worship. The early Christians found a birthday celebration as religious. Importantly, the early Christians found a birthday celebration of a religious figure strange or blasphemous. The only people who celebrated birthdays were the pagans in Rome. But yet now we celebrate the birth of Christ, and everybody's all birth of Christ crazy, aren't they? Well, that's Saturn, and that Saturn is El. All the gods were named El. The Canaanite gods are named El. Let me see if I can show you something about this before we get totally through. Let me just go to YouTube and Yale Access. See if I can pull this off here. Yeah, here we go. We were talking last time about the mysterious episode by the Yale Grip. Now, she's a Yale scholar, and let me turn it up a little here. And
a lot of biblical chronologies, which makes it suspect for other sorts of reasons as well. So the Hyksos theory is one that got people very excited for that God had once acted on their behalf, rescuing them from bondage, binding them to himself in an eternal covenant. A little bit about the outline of the story, and then we're going to finally have an introduction between God and Moses, which will, I think, bring us back to some of the conversations we've had at the beginning of the course. So let me first say a little bit about the storyline and some of the themes.
Let me see if I can get to
and in the story of Noah's Ark. Okay, Noah's Ark is a teva. And scholars have always been quick to point out that in both cases, and so he said to the offender, "Why do you strike your fellow?" He retorted, "Who made you chief in a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites? Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me.
So that's the land of milk and honey,
I have seen
not
how
theirs.
The Egyptians oppress them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt."
How am I going to find this?
As the head of a council of divine beings. He's occasionally described.
Here we go.
The father of the various gods and humans. Texts also, but focusing for a moment on the patriarchal traditions of Genesis, God is 6 times called El Shaddai. Other names are El Elyon, El Olam, El Roi, El Bethel. You can see the translations of these.
El.
The everlasting God, God Most High, a God of seeing, a God of the house of God, and so on. El is the name of the chief god in the Canaanite pantheon. Flip over to the other side of your handout.
Not Hebrews, Canaanite.
Where I discuss an important set of texts that were discovered at a place called Ras Shamra. Ras Shamra was ancient Ugarit. In 1928, a peasant in Syria discovered a tomb at Ras Shamra, which was subsequently excavated by the French, and it was found to contain a library of tablets that were written in a language very, very close to biblical Hebrew. It's clear that Hebrew is simply a Canaanite dialect. In fact, I remember reading one scholar said if you go back far enough, you're really hard pressed to tell the difference between Canaanite and Hebrew. And in these texts,
because it was
we
stolen.
read of the exploits of the gods
That's
of
where they came
Canaanite
from.
religion. These gods include the sky god El, I've listed here, the father of the various gods and humans.
Saturn.
El has a wife, Asherah. She's listed third on your paper.
The queen of
a
heaven.
Mother goddess. Their daughter, Anat, who is a goddess of love and war. She's quite fierce.
And Nana.
And then their son, Baal, who is a storm god. He is depicted in mythological literature as
Zeus.
defeating both the chaotic sea god, the sea god Yam, and the god of death, Mot. There are striking resemblances between the biblical God of the patriarchs and the Canaanite god El. El is the head of the council of gods. He is said to have a long white beard. He dwells on a mountain top in a tent. His epithets include father of all creatures, bull, king. He is also described as the protector of patriarchs, patriarchal figures, a god of the father of the clan, it says in the text. He guides them, he protects them, he promises them descendants. Many biblical passages depict God exactly this way, as the head of a council of divine beings. He's occasionally described with some of the epithets that are associated with El. He's referred to as the father of all creatures. There are poetic passages in which he is referred to as bull, also certainly as king.
Yep.
And in the patriarchal narratives, God refers to himself as the God of the Father. I am the God of the Father, the same way El is referred to. He guides and protects the patriarchs. He makes promises of progeny to Abraham and his heirs. He also is associated with a mountaintop, Sinai, and gives instructions for the building of a tabernacle, a tent-like structure in which he will dwell. Many personal and place names in the patriarchal narratives are compounds in which one element is El. Yisrael, Yishmael, Beth El. El is the God of the patriarchs. By contrast, after the time of Moses, Israelite names start to be formed using Yah or Yahu as part of the name Yahweh.
There.
Elijah in Hebrew is Eliyahu. So you start to have theophorics, names that use the name of a...
Now that's about enough from her, but there's where you get your Saturn connection. And ironically, if, I don't know, let's just Google, here's Sayers. They're just people wearing goat pants. And normal people here, which are kind of naked. And you can see in these Roman depictions, they're just people running around, a little bit barbaric compared to the Romans, and they referred to them that way. But, let's see. Saturn itself, if you'll look, is just an incredible planet with a halo around it too, and it's where a lot of the halo depiction come from. And the Sumerians knew he had a halo, and they gave it to their original sun god. It got passed down through Mithra, through all of time. But on top of that, you know how the Jewish star has got a hexagram in it, and so that's the five-pointed star. And if you look directly down on the top of Saturn, there's a perfect hexagram right on top of it that I'm sure somebody's going to equate to the hexagon, the spheroid. Look at this perfect hexagon that's shown here onto it. And I've got a video or two on this. And of course, Saturn, a hexagon you can make a cube out of in a 3D representation, like this picture right here is a cube. And here the people are spinning around like the rings on Saturn, going around the cube at the mosque. And it's just a weird mimicry that's mankind's been a trap under for over 2,000 years. And it really, really is. I mean, look at this giant hexagon box here. It's unreal how there are hexes made all over the world in great places that match this hexagon pattern. If you'll look, I've got a video on that too. And this is where Mr. and Mrs. come from. You're saying that you are bound, that you are stir, and she is your wife, that you are taking this holy place and willing to do the things that they did, by the way, to make mankind go forward. That's what the original pact was, that a man and a woman would do in front of a priest of what's now known as a pagan religion that actually is the exact same religion that we carry today, only twisted and turned by Roman rubbish.